Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Cesar, and in my presentation that I have for you today, I'll be going over the two films that I wrote, that I viewed during this semester, and the film responses and what I wrote and rewrote in those. In each section, I'll be going over a brief summary of the film, a historiographical analysis, some accuracies, inaccuracies, and other additional context of the time that it takes place, and I'll also be going over the writing processes involved. Okay, so going into this, I watched two films this semester, Mangopandi, The Rising, and Taegukgi, The Brotherhood of War. So I'll first be going over Mangopandi, The Rising. So this film is a 2005 Indian biographical drama film that takes place during the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 and focuses on Mangopandi, who was an actual soldier. Some brief summary of this film. So the film starts off with Mangopandi about to be executed by the British authority for his role in the mutiny, and it turns out the executioner could not make it, so it gets rescheduled, and then the film after that is basically flashbacks of the events leading up to the mutiny and Mangopandi's past life. In one of the flashbacks, we see Mangopandi fighting in Afghanistan for the British, and that's where he meets his friend William Gordon, a British soldier who is very sympathetic towards the Indians and towards the rest of the Sepoy soldiers in the rest of the film. So one of the major causes for the Sepoy Mutiny was the introduction of these new cartridges for the Sepoy regiment's weapons. Now this cartridge was made out of cow and pig product, and since most of the soldiers were Hindu or Muslim, the soldiers could not bite the cartridges out of religious grounds, so essentially the soldiers refused to demonstrate the use of their weapons by biting the cartridges. Mangopandi at first caves into one of the exercises and bites the cartridge to demonstrate the use of his weapon, but later on Mangopandi would end up regretting this, as it turns out he was brought to a factory, and in fact the cartridges were made out of cow and pig product. And then eventually, at the next time the soldiers and Mangopandi are asked to demonstrate the use of their weapons at a parade, Mangopandi and the rest of the Sepoy regiment refuse to use their weapons, even when threatened with cannon fire. And then eventually, the Sepoy regiment and Mangopandi raid a weapons armory and then begin a mutiny, and then they plan to spread this mutiny and this rebellion throughout the rest of India by marching. And the British authority obviously does not approve of this, so they begin cracking down on the mutiny, and Mangopandi eventually gets arrested and then put on trial for his role in it. And then the film ends with Mangopandi finally being executed by hanging. And the crowd of onlookers are so disturbed and so angered by this that they start to rebel against British authority and then cause a civil unrest. This film uses a history from below approach because it focuses on the perspective of a regular soldier, a regular Sepoy soldier through Mangopandi, and a regular British soldier through William Gordon. And some key themes in this film include Orientalism and imperialism and the effect it had on India. India at this time was under British rule, and we see the higher British authority, especially in the military figures, treating the Sepoy regiment very badly, despite their loyalty to the British. And we also see some racist remarks made by some of the British people against the Indians in the film. One of the only examples I see of how imperialism could have been a good thing was when William Gordon saved a young woman from being burned to death because she was in a ritual called sati, which is this tradition where a widow is put on her dead husband's funeral pyre and then is forced to burn alongside with the corpse to death. And going into the writing process of my film response, one of the things that I improved upon from my first paper was cutting down on some of the plot summary, providing a more detailed historiographical analysis regarding, the history from below approach. And one thing that Dr. Umbrello, who was a big help in, helping me to improve my paper, was this topic of Indian identity and nationalism and how it played into the film. He raised the question of was this Indian identity portrayed in the film, a part of, was it actually realistic, or was it just something that the writers projected onto the characters? And looking back, I believe that this, Indian identity wasn't that realistic. It was more meant to appeal to a modern Indian audience, because in terms of one single Indian identity, that still had many ways to go in 19th century India. India was and is still very diverse, with many cultural, religious, and ethnic backgrounds. But Indian nationalism was a key theme in this film, as some Indians view this event, the Sepoy Mutiny, as, their first act of independence against the British rule, and it would set the stage for the eventual Indian independence movements that we saw in the 20th century with Mahatma Gandhi. So going into the next film is Taeguk Gi, the Brotherhood of War. Now, Taeguk Gi, the Brotherhood of War, takes place during the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. Now, this was a part of the overarching Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had differing ideologies and both wanted to have influence in Asia. So some brief plot summary of the film. It focuses primarily on these two brothers, Jin Tae and Jin Sok, as they were fighting in the Korean War unwittingly. They were unwittingly drafted into the South Korean army when they accidentally boarded a train in Seoul. And throughout the film, they just wanted to survive. They just wanted to last this war. Jin Tae wanted to look after his younger brother Jin Sok and make sure that he went to college, make sure that he could be able to send him home by winning, a medal and performing fiercely in battle. And Jin Tae in the film also suffers some inner conflict, as he begins to genuinely enjoy killing, genuinely enjoy hurting people the more he fights. So in the final battle of the film, we see that, Jin Sok finally reunites with Jin Tae after they had been separated. Jin Tae ended up fighting on the North Korean side, and in a touching moment, Jin Tae finally recognizes his younger brother Jin Sok, and he provides for Jin Sok to make an escape before he's killed. And at the end of the film, the very end of the film, we see that takes place in modern Korea. We see an old Jin Sok finally find the remains of his older brother Jin Tae. Now, going into a historiographical analysis of the film, this film also uses a history from below approach. We see the Korean War through the lens of these two brothers from a family who were struggling in post-World War II Korea and near the beginning of the Korean War. One of the major themes of this film is, the historical context of the Cold War and the effect it had on the Korean Peninsula. The North was heavily influenced by the Soviet Union and their communist ideology. They were brainwashed into hating the South Koreans, and in one scene, we see Jin Tae kill a North Korean soldier who calls him a spawn of Western imperialists. And then meanwhile, on the opposing side, we see the influence that the United States had on South Korea in their anti-communist rhetoric. Characters such as Sergeant Lee said that he wanted to go and kill all the Reds. He hates everything red, screw the commies. And we see that just how divided Korea had become, and just how heavily influenced by propaganda that the soldiers were into killing their own countrymen. Another major theme of this film is the reality of war. This film does not glorify war, it does not glamorize it. This war doesn't take sides, it doesn't say, communist North bad, democratic South good. It just shows the brutal, portrayal of war. We see gore, we see blood and guts. We see some of the problems not really mentioned in war films, like food shortages and mental health problems that the soldiers encountered. We see a soldier commit suicide because he just couldn't take it. And overall, it just shows that this war was very tragic, and it costed the lives of many Koreans. Going into the writing process of these film responses, one of the things that I improved upon from my first paper was, some plot explanation errors. I said that Jintae's fiance, joined the Communist Party during the Northern occupation when it actually occurred long before that. And I also provided, some more historiographical analysis in terms of history from below and how that ties into this film. And then I also, had to do some spelling and some punctuation, adjustments. And yeah, overall, Dr. Umbrella was also a big help in, addressing some issues with my first paper and helping me to improve upon in my rewrites. Overall, I thought this film was generally a solid depiction of the Korean War, and I liked how it didn't take one specific side. It just showed how these two sides are at war, they're fighting each other, and how these two brothers who didn't even want to be a part of this conflict, they had to survive and do everything it took. So some closing statements I'd like to make. Overall, this semester was pretty good with the rest of you guys. I enjoyed talking to you guys on the Padlet assignments and discussion forums. I look forward to looking at your video projects, your film responses, and I can say that I learned a lot during this semester. I bettered my knowledge of history.